If I'd just signed my name on the back of the canvas, none of this would have happened. One stroke of a Sharpie. Fern Byrne, 2018. That's it. But that wasn't how we worked. Lena and I built shows together. Her blocking, my brush, both our signatures on the program. I never thought I needed to claim anything. Then I found the certificate behind the Tempest drop, and I realized I was the only one who'd believed that. It was a Tuesday morning in March, the kind of damp, gray morning that makes old canvas smell like mushrooms and sizing. I was at the shop early because the storage rack had started leaning in a way that made me nervous. I have many talents, but dying under a cascade of rented palace walls is not how I plan to be remembered. The scene shop was in a brick building behind a discount flooring warehouse, with windows painted shut and a bathroom sink that produced either cold water or judgment. Lena had signed the lease years earlier, but I had a key, a shelf, a drafting table, and enough dried paint on the floor to qualify as geological evidence. We had met in grad school, fallen in love during a production of Blood Wedding, broken up 5 years later during a production of Our Town, and somehow kept working together because neither of us could afford to lose the other's eye. She was better with structure. She could look at a director's 12 vague adjectives and turn them into a room. I could make muslin look like weather, marble, rot, distance. On paper, she was the scenic designer more often than I was. In practice, the backdrops were usually where we met in the middle. Her scale drawings, my studies, both of us arguing over whether grief leaned green or blue. That morning, I was shifting the rolled Tempest drop away from the rack when a stiff, cream-colored envelope slid out from behind the canvas and landed at my feet. At first, I thought it was an old rental agreement. The shop was full of paperwork that had no business surviving. Lumber receipts, strike lists, a post-it that simply said, "No more real sand," in Lena's handwriting. I picked up the envelope because it had a clean edge, and nothing clean belonged on that floor. Inside was a certificate from the Artists' Rights Society. I knew what ARS was, of course. They handled registrations and licensing for visual artists, including theatrical imagery when companies used production photos in published materials or remounts. Lena and I had talked about registering some of our designs years earlier. Or rather, Lena had talked about it, over coffee while I was scraping cobalt out of my fingernails. "We should organize the archive," she'd said. "Put the major drops in properly. Joint where it makes sense." Where it makes sense had sounded boring and administrative, the kind of phrase that made my brain shut the windows. I had said, sure. Then a tech week swallowed us, then another. Then our relationship ended, and the work kept coming in. The certificate in my hand was dated 2 years before that coffee conversation. Registered work, Sea Room Backdrop, The Tempest, 2017. Author, Lena Cross. Sole claimant, Lena Cross. My first thought was stupidly practical. Why was this behind the canvas? My second thought was worse. Why did it say soul? I remembered that backdrop clearly because we had fought over it. Lena wanted shipwreck gray. I wanted the color of a bruise underwater. I spent 2 nights building the far horizon in transparent washes, then dry brushed foam with a toothbrush because the director wanted the ocean to look like it had teeth. Lena had painted the broken arch and laid out the perspective. It was not hers alone. It was not mine alone. It was ours, in the messy, sleepless way most theater things are. I stood there holding the certificate while rain tapped the high windows and the rack creaked behind me. Then I did the one thing I am still proud of. I did not call her. I wanted to. My thumb actually hovered over her name. Lena would answer on the 3rd ring and say, "What's on fire?" because that had been our greeting for a decade. I wanted to hear her explain it as a clerical mistake, a temporary registration, a piece of paperwork she meant to amend. I wanted to hand her the truth and let her make it harmless. Instead, I laid the certificate on my drafting table, weighted the corners with 2 cans of Roscoe Black, and photographed it. Front, back, envelope, the place where it had been caught behind the drop. I took wider photos of the storage rack too, because I had learned from years of production notes that a close-up without context is just a pretty accusation. Then I put the certificate back in the envelope and the envelope back where I had found it. Not because I thought it needed to stay hidden, because I needed to know whether it was the only one. My hands were shaking by then. I told myself it was the cold. The shop heat had been unreliable since the Obama administration, so it was a plausible lie. I went to my shelf. The shelf was the one area of the shop Lena never touched, mostly because it looked like a raccoon had developed a specialty in color theory. Old notebooks, test cards, labeled yogurt containers of dry pigment, paint rags I kept meaning to throw out, and the tube of ultramarine from Hamlet. It was still there, half crimped, with a crust around the cap, and the supplier's batch sticker fading but legible, lot 3147, which I photographed without knowing why. I had bought it in 2018 because the director wanted a night sky that felt expensive and doomed, and the theater's paint budget was neither. I picked it up and held it for a moment. Some colors remember your hand. That blue did. At my apartment that night, I opened my production notebooks on the kitchen table and searched the ARS registry. I expected one mistake. I found 6 entries before midnight. The Tempest, Sea Room. Hamlet, Sky. The Duchess of Malfi, Courtyard. Twelfth Night, Orchard. Uncle Vanya, Birch Grove. The Cherry Orchard, Nursery Wall. Lena Cross, sole author. I also learned, somewhere in the fine print of the membership terms, that ARS had binding authority to resolve authorship disputes and restructure royalties for registered works. No courtroom required, just documentation, which sounded simple in the same way paint the sea sounds simple. The oldest was Duchess, registered in August 2016. That stopped me harder than the rest. I pulled the Duchess notebook from the stack. It had a coffee ring on the cover and a smear of burnt umber across page 19. I knew exactly where to look. There was a pigment study for the courtyard wall, green-black shadows, scraped highlights, a rust stain under an imaginary window. My notes ran along the margin. Add bone black, kill yellow, damp rot, not forest. At the bottom corner were Lena's initials. Except they were wrong. Not wrong like forged by a stranger. Wrong like added later by someone in a hurry. My notes were in a soft 4B pencil because I pressed too hard and like a dark line. The initials were harder, shinier, probably HB. Lena usually wrote with mechanical pencil, tiny and upright. ARS only required digital files for theatrical registrations. She must have photographed the page years ago when the notebook lived on my shelf and she still wandered over to borrow paint, tape, pencils, whatever she needed without asking, because that was what trust looked like then. I stared at that small gray LC until it seemed to pulse. The ARS registry listed that sketch as a preparatory work connected to the backdrop. Author? Lena Cross. But I had drawn it. I remembered drawing it on the floor while Lena was in the other room on a production call, telling someone we could not make a 7-foot fireplace more metaphorical for free. That was when the question changed. It was no longer, why did she register the Tempest? It was, how far back did she start writing herself into the corners? The next morning, I called Martin Alvarez. Martin had been the scene shop supervisor at the regional theater where Lena and I did most of our early work. He was retired now and spent his mornings repairing violins badly, according to his wife, and his afternoons knowing where everything was. Martin had taught me how to stretch a drop without scalloping the edges, and how to sharpen a pencil with a utility knife without losing part of my thumb. He was also still friends with Lena. I didn't tell him everything. Not at first. I said I was organizing records for old productions and asked if he still had invoices from 2018. He sighed, the sigh of a man being rewarded for never throwing anything away. Fern, I have invoices from shows. They did. I said. Eventually. After you threatened to paint the king's throne with house beige. That was a joke. It was a credible joke. He told me to come by the next day. I spent the rest of that afternoon making a spreadsheet, which is how you know a feeling has become a plan. I am not naturally organized in the way people mean when they say organized. My studio looks like an argument between paper and dust. But my notebooks are precise. Dates, mixes, suppliers, weather, rehearsal notes. Which brush failed me? Who asked for what impossible thing? I made columns. Production, year, ARS registration date, listed author, my notebook date, photo evidence, material invoice, notes. Then I started matching. For 12th night, Lena's registration claimed a completed orchard study in May 2020. In May 2020, Lena had been in Seattle helping her sister after surgery. I knew because I had fed her elderly cat Gesso and sent her daily proof-of-life photos. I found one in my messages, Gesso glaring from inside a paint box, dated May 14. Behind him, on my table, was the half-finished orchard study. For Uncle Vanya, the Birch Grove registration was dated 3 weeks before the theater approved the design change from interior parlor to exterior suggestion. I had an email from the director, full of apologies, and the phrase, "Can we make Russia more breathable?" dated after Lena's claimed completion. For Hamlet, the registration said Lena created the backdrop in January 2018. My notebook showed color tests starting in March. The production photos were from April. The ultramarine invoice would matter because it placed the materials in my hands during the actual build, not during her neat fictional timeline. Each receipt did something different to my head. The certificate proved she had done it once. The registry proved it was not once. The notebook dates proved her timelines were convenient. The photos proved I had been there. But I still didn't know whether any of it would matter to anyone but me. Theater is full of shared work. A backdrop passes through designer, assistant, charge artist, stitcher, carpenter, intern with a roller, actor who leans against it while wearing body makeup, even though there is a sign that says "Do not touch." Authorship can be a foggy room. Lena knew that. That was the part that hurt in a professional place, not a romantic one. She understood the ambiguity and had used it like a scrim. Light it one way, you see through. Light it another, it becomes a wall. Martin lived in a narrow house with tomato plants and coffee cans along the back steps. He met me at the door, holding a folder and wearing a sweater with a hole at the elbow. "I pulled what I found," he said. "Before you ask, yes, I made copies. The originals stay with me because I trust nobody, including myself." At his kitchen table, he laid out invoices in date order. Lumber, muslin, glue, scenic dope. Then one from Laird Scenic Supply, March 9, 2018. French ultramarine, dry pigment, acrylic binder, whiting, hide glue. Buyer, Fern Byrne. Production note, Hamlet Skydrop. My name looked strangely formal there, as if it belonged to someone with cleaner shoes. Martin watched me read it. "This isn't just organizing, is it?" he said. I did not answer quickly enough. He leaned back. "Lena?" I looked up. Martin had known us when we were young and unbearable. He had watched us fall asleep on opposite ends of a paint frame and wake up pretending not to be in love. He had also watched us break up and continue passing each other buckets like nothing had split. "I found registrations," I said. ARS. A number of them. Sole author. His face changed very little, which told me more than if he had looked shocked. "You knew?" "No," he said. "I knew she was worried about credit. That's not the same." I waited. He tapped the folder once with 2 fingers. "After you got that..." I had not known she applied, too. Martin's mouth tightened. "She told me she was tired of being seen as your assistant. She wasn't my assistant. I know that. Everyone knew that. He gave me a look that was kind but not soft. Fern? I hated him a little for that. Not because he was wrong, because the world had a way of simplifying two people until one became the name and the other became the phrase after it. Fern Byrne and collaborator. Lena Cross's painter. Designer and charge. Exes. Women who still work together. Can you believe it? She could have said, I said, and my voice was smaller than I wanted. I would have registered them jointly. I would have signed anything fair. I believe you. But you're still friends with her. I am. He pushed the invoice toward me, and I'm giving you this because the record should be straight. Friendship doesn't get to move dates. That was Martin's choice. It mattered because I took the copies. Before I left, he put the original invoice on his scanner again and made a cleaner version, muttering that if we were going to be miserable, we might as well be legible. The reframe should have made me gentler. Maybe it did, eventually. In the moment, it made me furious in a more complicated way. Pure greed is simple. You can hate it cleanly. But Lena had not only stolen money, she had tried to build a version of history where she could not be erased. And to do it, she had erased me first. That week, I collected my own archive. I pulled color-matching cards from flat files in my apartment, scrap canvas tests from an old portfolio, palette sheets separated by wax paper and labeled with dates, because past Fern had occasionally been a blessing. Scenic painters keep things normal people would call trash. A 3-inch swatch of sky, a strip of fake stone, a card with 6 versions of mildew. You keep them for remounts, repairs, arguments, and because sometimes the exact dead lavender of a prison wall will be needed again. I found Hamlet cards wrapped in newsprint, the ultramarine notes still clear. UMB plus bone black plus zinc, glaze 3. Too pretty, dirty it. I found Duchess studies with my thumbprint in the corner, a dark oval of graphite and pigment. I found Vanya birches, scratched through with the back of a brush. The cards were not proof by themselves. They were personal. They could be dismissed as after-the-fact, mislabeled, sentimental debris from a painter who was angry her ex got credit. So I called a conservation scientist named Dr. Nisha Patel, whose name I got from a museum preparator I trusted. Her lab was not glamorous. It occupied 2 rooms above a frame shop and smelled faintly of solvents and tea. I told her exactly what I needed and what I did not need. I'm not asking you to say who painted what, I said. I'm asking whether the materials on these test cards are consistent with the production periods in my records, and whether they predate the registered claims. She appreciated the distinction. Scientists like it when you do not ask them to perform magic wearing a lab coat. She examined the cards, photographed them, and explained the limits. Non-destructive analysis could identify pigments and binders. It could compare formulations. Dating acrylic binder was not like counting tree rings, but certain additives, degradation patterns, and supplier batches could support a time frame, especially when paired with invoices and records. I can give you a report with confidence levels, she said. Not certainty where certainty doesn't exist. That's more than I have now. It may also complicate your life. My life is already wearing tap shoes. She smiled once, barely. I liked her. While the lab work was pending, I kept cross-referencing. I did not confront Lena. That silence became its own strange room. She texted me about ordinary things. Did I know where the spare jigsaw blades were? Could I send the elevation for 3 sisters? Was I free Thursday to look at samples? I answered only what I had to. Through the glass, I could see the lights on. Lena was inside, photographing the 12th night orchard under the studio lamps. She had clipped the top edge to the pipe and angled the softbox the way I had shown her years ago, to catch texture without glare. Her hair was tied up with a strip of muslin. She looked tired. She also looked completely at home. I knocked. She turned, saw me, and froze. For 2 seconds, neither of us moved. Then she came to the door but did not open it. "Your key doesn't work?" she said through the glass.
That seems to be the theme. I had to change the locks. The landlord's insurance thing.
Because of the locks or because of ours? There it was. Not shouted, not dramatic, just 3 letters in the damp hallway. Her eyes flicked away. If she had looked confused, I might have doubted myself. If she had looked angry, I might have fought. But she looked ashamed, and it landed worse than either. "I can explain," she said. "I know." That surprised her. "I know about the grant," I said. "I know you felt written out. I know you thought people saw you as secondary." Her mouth trembled once, then steadied. They did. Her hand rested on the inside handle. She still did not open the door. "I registered the works because someone had to," she said. "You never cared about paperwork. I cared about trust. You cared about being pure, about the work, about not needing credit until everyone gave it to you anyway." That hurt, because it was partly unfair and partly not. I had been careless with credit when it came easily. I had waved off program errors because I knew who had done what. I had confused my private certainty with public record. That was my mistake. It was not permission. "You registered Duchess before it was finished," I said. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I left before I begged her to be the person I had loved. That night, a younger technician named Mara texted me. She had been working with us for 2 years, mostly carpentry, excellent with hinges, terrible with remembering lunch. Her message was short. "I'm sorry. I didn't know until today." I wrote back, "Not your mess." She replied, "Still my shop too." The next afternoon, she met me outside with a coffee and a small, but I kept it on my ring for 3 days before returning it, because it felt like proof that someone younger, someone without a decade of history to cloud her, could look at the situation and see the shape of it. Dr. Patel's report came 2 weeks later. It was careful, restrained, and devastating. The Hamlet test cards contained French ultramarine consistent with the supplier batch listed on the March 2018 invoice and matching the retained pigment tube, lot 3147, still in my possession. The acrylic binder matched the formulation sold by Laird during that period. The aging and handling patterns were consistent with materials prepared before the April 2018 production photographs, not with a later reconstruction. The Duchess cards showed pigment mixtures and binder layers consistent with my October 2016 notebook entries. The registered preparatory sketch bore graphite layers in 2 distinguishable hardness ranges. The underlying drawing and notations were consistent with the softer pencil used throughout my notebook, while the initials were added in a harder graphite on top of existing smudging. The Vanya birch studies contained a matte medium formulation that, according to manufacturer records, had not shipped until after Lena's registered date, but before my notebook date. In other words, her timeline was not just unlikely, it required paint to travel backward. I sat with the report at my kitchen table until the light changed. There is a peculiar grief in getting what you asked for. I had wanted proof. Once I had it, the fantasy of misunderstanding died completely. No clerical error, no one-time panic, no paperwork shortcut intended to be fixed later. The pattern was too broad, too specific, too maintained. I prepared the ARS challenge like I would prepare a paint elevation. Clean, labeled, impossible to misread. I included the hidden certificate photograph, the public registry printouts, Martin's invoice, my notebook scans, selected dated photos, Dr. Patel's report, and a statement that I was not seeking criminal action or public sanction. I was requesting correction of authorship and suspension of disputed registrations pending review. Before I sent it, I emailed Lena. Not because I owed her warning, because some last, foolish part of me wanted to give her a chance to step toward the truth before an institution pulled her there. I wrote, "I am filing a formal challenge with ARS on Friday. I am asking for joint authorship where joint authorship is accurate, and sole authorship where the records support it. I am not asking them to remove you from work we made together. I am asking them to stop removing me." She called within 5 minutes. I let it ring. Then she texted, "Please don't do this way." I typed and deleted several answers. The only one I sent was, "What way would have worked?" She did not reply. The ARS process was slower than anger and faster than healing. First came acknowledgement, then a temporary suspension of the 6 registrations, meaning no further licensing payments would be released while the review was pending. Then a request for additional documentation. Then Lena's response, which I was not supposed to see in full, but could infer from the questions they asked me. Had I been an employee executing her designs? Sometimes, yes. Not on these. Had she directed the overall visual concept? Sometimes, yes. So had I. Were my notebooks contemporaneous? Yes. And here were the dated photo slides, the supplier invoice, the email approvals, the lab report. Did I have witnesses? I had Martin, who wrote a statement in his plain, shop floor language. Fern mixed and painted the primary sky treatment for Hamlet. Lena was present for design review, but did not execute that drop alone. He wrote similar statements for Tempest and Duchess. He did not embellish. Martin would rather sand plywood with his forehead than exaggerate. Mara wrote a shorter statement about current shop access and the 12th night documentation session, though ARS did not need much of it. Her choice mattered to me anyway. The community noticed before the decision came. People always say theater is a family, which is true in the sense that it contains love, unpaid labor, old resentments, and at least one person who knows exactly where the extension cords are and will not tell you if crossed. Word moved through directors, designers, stage managers, the lobby bar after openings. Some people called me brave. Some called me petty. A lighting designer I had known for 15 years told me, with the grave concern of a man who had once billed a nonprofit for 3 lunches in one day, that authorship is complicated, and I should be careful not to damage Lena's career. "Thank you," I said. I was waiting for a man with a fog machine to explain complexity. He did not laugh. I did, later, in my car, for about 4 seconds before crying so hard I missed the turn onto my street. Jobs got quiet. Not all of them. Enough. A director who had already asked about my availability for a summer production suddenly went in another direction. A small company delayed signing a contract until the ARS matter was resolved. Nobody said blacklist. They said timing, optics, awkward. Lena and I did not speak. She sent one email through ARS offering to amend 3 works to joint authorship if I withdrew the challenge on the remaining 3. I stared at that offer for a long time. It would have been easier. It would have restored some money, some credit, maybe some possibility of walking into the shop again without feeling my organs rearrange. But Hamlet was one of the 3 she wanted to keep. The blue sky. My blue sky. The one I had bought pigment for when the budget ran dry. The one where my wrist cramped so badly, Martin taped a brush to a dowel so I could finish the upper wash without climbing down every 10 minutes. The one Lena had praised quietly at 2 a.m, saying, "It looks like a thought he can't survive." I declined. The final review meeting happened over video. ARS had a panel of 3. An administrator, an artist member, and an attorney who spoke very little and looked like she could smell missing attachments through a screen. Lena appeared from the shop office. I appeared from my apartment, with a neutral wall behind me because the rest of the room looked like paper had molted. When Lena spoke, she did not sound like a villain. That almost made it harder. She said she had originated many of the concepts. She said theatrical design was collaborative by nature. She said she had managed client communications, contracts, and final submissions. She said she believed, at the time, that as lead scenic designer, she was entitled to register the visual works. Then the artist member asked, "Why were some registrations dated before the works were completed?" Lena looked down. "Administrative estimates," she said. The attorney made a note.
They asked about the initials on the Duchess study. Lena said she often marked sketches for filing. Dr. Patel's report sat in the packet like a patient blade. They asked about Hamlet. I explained the material record, the invoice, the test cards, the production photographs. I kept my voice steady by looking not at Lena's square on the screen, but at the small blue paint stain on my left thumbnail. It had been there for 3 days. Some habits are loyal. At the end, the administrator asked whether I was seeking removal of Lena's authorship from any disputed works. No, I said. Not where she contributed. I'm seeking accurate authorship. Lena looked up then. For the first time in months, she looked directly at me.
The decision came 19 days later. ARS reclassified 4 works as joint authorship: Tempest, Duchess, Twelfth Night, and Vanya. They reclassified Hamlet as my sole painted backdrop derived from a collaborative production design, with Lena credited for overall scenic concept, but not sole visual authorship of the registered work. Cherry Orchard was left as Lena's sole authorship. My evidence there was too thin, and honestly, they were probably right. I had repaired that wall and done finish work, but the core design was hers. That part mattered to me. If everything had gone my way, it would have felt like revenge had blurred into appetite. The registrations were amended. Future royalties would be split according to the new classifications. Past royalties from the disputed period were reviewed. I did not sue Lena. I did not file a complaint beyond the ARS process. I did not make a public post with screenshots, though I drafted one in my head during several showers. The arbitration settlement required Lena to surrender a portion of past royalties into a joint trust administered through ARS for small grants to early career theater artists, painters, assistants, technicians, the people whose names fall off posters first. Some of the money also came to me, less than people imagine, and more than Lena wanted. The trust was not my idea. It was the panel's, after reviewing both our statements about credit and legacy. It was infuriatingly elegant. Martin called when he heard. "Well," he said, "the record is straighter." Not straight. No record is straight. Best you get is less crooked. That was Martin's version of a blessing. Lena did not call. She sent one email, 3 sentences. I thought I was protecting what I had made. I know now I took what you made too. I'm sorry. I read it several times, looking for the place where it would become enough. By then, I had lost the shop. Lena owned the lease, and after the ARS decision, she gave formal notice that I needed to remove my materials within 30 days. It was polite. It was devastating. Mara helped me pack on a Sunday when Lena was not there. We wrapped brushes in newspaper, stacked flats of color cards, carried my drafting stool down the alley. I found old things in corners. A cracked mug from Macbeth, a roll of glow tape, the first scale ruler Lena ever stole from me and insisted she had liberated from chaos. Mara held up a box labeled Fern, Sky, Stone, Dead Plants. "Do you want to explain this filing system?" she asked. "It's intuitive. To raccoons? To artists." She hugged me before I left. Not dramatically. One arm, quick, because we were both carrying too much. I built my next production in a borrowed warehouse owned by a puppet company that heated the space with 2 portable units and optimism. The floor sloped. The freight elevator worked if you sang to it, according to the puppet people, though I found swearing equally effective. My paint frame was improvised from pipe and sandbags. My tea froze once, overnight in April. It was not the shop. For weeks, I would reach for things that weren't there. The shelf at shoulder height, the north window, Lena's voice from the drafting room saying, "Don't make that shadow tasteful." The rhythm of another person knowing when to hand you a rag before you asked. That was the cost no decision could reimburse. Not royalties, not credit, not the formal correction of a public record. I had wanted justice to feel like balance. It
felt more like amputation with excellent documentation. Still, the amended registrations existed. When I searched the ARS registry, my name appeared where it should. Fern Byrne. Joint author, sole author, contributor. Not everywhere, not inflated, just there. One afternoon, an email arrived from a young scenic artist in Vermont applying for the First Trust grant. She wrote that she wanted funds to document her process properly because I'm learning that if it isn't recorded, it can be taken for granted. I sat with that sentence longer than she could have known. Maybe that was the only clean thing to come out of it. Not punishment, not vindication, but a small fund that told people at the beginning of their careers to keep their names attached to their own hands. The first time I used ultramarine again, I almost didn't. It was on my shelf in the warehouse, the same battered tube from Hamlet, cap stuck, batch sticker browned at the edges. I had newer blue, cleaner blue that did not come with a file folder and a ghost. But the design needed a night window, and no other pigment had that particular depth when thinned. I ran the cap under warm water in the puppet company.
I painted alone that night. No Lena in the next room. No argument over whether sorrow should lean green. No shared coffee going cold on the table. Just the warehouse hum, the occasional groan of pipes, and my brush moving across a fresh canvas. Before I stretched it fully, I turned the lower corner toward me. For a long time, I had thought signing the back of a canvas was vanity, or distrust, or a thing fine artists did because they made objects that lived alone. Theater had taught me to disappear into the whole, to serve the story, to let the audience see the room, not the labor. I still believed in that, mostly. But I also believed in records now, in dates, in names, in the humble morality of invoices, in Martin's folder, Mara's spare key, Dr. Patel's careful report, in proof that does not shout, but remains. I took a black marker from my pocket, not a ceremonial pen, a Sharpie with paint on the cap. On the back of the stretcher, in the lower right corner, I wrote Fern Byrne. Then the date. Then, because accuracy matters, I added the production title and the words "scene." The line looked small against all that blank canvas. Small, but visible. I capped the marker and picked up the brush again. The ultramarine waited on the palette, dark as weather, bright where the light caught it. For years, too much of my life had been stored under someone else's name, like pigment sealed in a tube and pushed to the back of a shelf. This time, before the first wash dried, I made sure the record knew whose hand had mixed the blue.